All right, welcome back to the F3 Northeast Way Q Source podcast. I'm your host, Blake Anderson, Money Pit. Back with me today, Josh Herring, Plato. Plato, thanks for coming back on the podcast.
Happy to be here, Money Pit. It's always fun.
Yeah, great. So, Pax, we're in quadrant 4.2, and it's schooling. So, if those of you who don't know or maybe missed our last episode that we did together maybe about a month ago, Plato is a teacher. And so it's great to have him here to talk about schooling. And so let me just give some context. And in the book Quadrant 4, we're starting to talk about how to be a sua sponte leader. And a sua sponte leader is someone who takes initiative, right? Individual initiative of his own accord. And this quadrant is really about leaving a legacy. It's really about training leaders. And so Dredd talks about a leadership development process, LDP. And he said there's four parts of it. And it's schooling, apprenticeship, opportunity, and failure. And the schooling being the first component of a leadership development process. And so anyways, glad to have a formal educator here with us to kind of talk more about what Dredd says. And one, Plato, want to get your take on the chapter, but then two, would just love to hear from you as an expert, as a professional in educating folks and training up new leaders. So first, hot take, tell us about the chapter as you read it and your thoughts.
Well, I think for the hot take, I think I love the vision of people continually learning and always wanting to grow as leaders. I think where I struggled with this chapter was seeing that located in schooling, because in that word schooling, I think of an institutional school that's going to have some kind of program, it's going to have formal classes, that's headed towards a certificate or a degree, and that people are paying money for. And in all honesty, I don't think the qualities that Dredd describes really come from schooling in that institutional sense. Schooling does something, it does something really important, but it's really a different thing. It's
Mm-hmm.
preparatory in
Yeah,
an important way. But Dredd's not talking about get your grounding, make sure you've got your kind of basic knowledge about reality. He's
sure.
talking about kind of some sort of very practical leadership. And the example he gave was of I think a sergeant who wrote on the board, take blame, give praise, and that was sort of
Mm-hmm.
what he always was supposed to do. Well, that's a great life principle. That in the vast majority of cases is not what you're going to get. If you come to Thales College and take my literature class, you won't get those kinds of things. You'll instead get me telling you, "What do you mean you didn't read the 75 pages of poetry I assigned?"
Yeah. Yeah, well, maybe let's let's take some of the concepts and we'll apply some of our understanding because I think though we may not necessarily agree with how some of the stories. I think we can see where he's trying to go, and so we know if schooling we might think about as more formal learning, whereas apprenticeship goes to being mentored, a little bit more hands on with someone else. Opportunity is the ability to use what you've learned, and then failure is having a situation where you're able to fail and fail in a safe way because we need failure to learn. So we just think about schooling as more formality. So we're reading a book, we're sitting in a course, we might be watching something on YouTube, but we haven't applied it yet, right? And so I mean I believe that you really need to apply something to know whether you really know it, and you don't know it till you apply it, but it has to start somewhere, right? And it has to be that input. And so you've got to have the input of new concepts, of new things to even know where to even what you need to start applying. And so maybe we can talk about schooling just from a correct input when we're developing leaders and getting the right input and information into their development process.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. That in that sense, a high impact man who is wanting to be a leader, who's wanting to grow in that way,
Mm-hmm.
really, I think needs to identify who are those sources of wisdom that he ought to be drawing from.
Yes.
And I think that's where you need a
Yes.
lot of discernment.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little. I don't necessarily even want to be called an expert educator these days. There's a lot of joke educators out there. We don't need to go
Yeah.
into it too far, but like, it's not a great day for formal education. But there are so many people who are giving out great wisdom for free in all kinds of formats.
Yes.
One I
Right. That's right.
recently run across. You're probably going to be more familiar with this guy, Lencioni, I think is his last
Sure,
name.
Patrick
Yep.
Lencioni, absolutely.
Yep. I recently started talking to some folks who love his insights. I started looking
Hmm.
into that. He puts all his stuff out for free on his
Right,
website. Now
right.
he'll charge you an arm and a leg to come do like a workshop for your company, but it's
Sure.
all there. And
Yeah, it
I
is.
think that's for PAX who are wanting to be leaders. Part of that really starts with just really kind of discerning who are some voices that can feed me and the skill sets that I need to grow in.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, there's an old adage, leaders are readers, right? And knowing, I mean, you become a leader as you lead people and you're out doing things, but we've got to change our mind. We've got to grow in our understanding, grow in our maturity, grow in our wisdom. And I think we need to be curious. And one, we as leader, hopefully, like Dred said, it's a continual process, right? A good leader is never going to stop learning. They're going to always be looking for new things and to continue to grow themselves. But also, if we're thinking about in this context, really, he's saying, so if we're training other leaders, what process would we want to take them through? And I think it's good to say, there's plenty of people you could listen to, but should you? Right?
Yeah.
Let's listen. Let's pick the right voices for where we're trying to go and where we are.
Maybe a couple, at least these two domains come to my mind when I'm thinking about that. Like, on the one
Mm-hmm.
hand, there are people who are speaking sort of just perennial truths,
Yeah,
things that are
that's right.
always true, and who are really going back to some time-honored sources of wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
Whether
Good
that's
point.
just going straight to Aristotle or whether
Mm-hmm.
that's reading Simon Sinek's Start with Why, who's
Sure.
basically translating Aristotle for the 21st century. Or
Okay.
there's folks who are really practitioners and they've got some really practical wisdom in a very direct space. I think
Hmm.
of my school's founder, Bob Luddy, is very much a practitioner in that sense. He started Captive Air 50 years ago. And whenever he gives a talk, he invariably kind of draws on some of the things he's learned about running a company, and he's
Hmm.
some very practical
Mm-hmm.
insight. Distilled all those into his books. He's got one called Entrepreneurial Life that is just literally like filled with a lot of those nuggets. But I think those are two different kinds of knowledge that too, if
That's a
we're
good
thinking about
point.
discernment, it's worth thinking about. Am I looking for sort of universally applicable
Mm-hmm.
truths, or do I want to find somebody who's really an excellent practitioner and learn from that practitioner?
Yeah, and it's probably both end, right? If we're wanting to have a well-rounded, you know, education, if we want a well-rounded understanding, we might look to both, right? I mean, I think someone who probably teeters on the edge of that when we think about leadership might be John Maxwell,
Mhm.
right? He's very much a practitioner in so much of the things he writes about. He's talking from first person experience. But at this point in his career, he's been doing it so long, he's almost become the thought leader in the space, right? But it was because he came through that applying practical things that he'd learned, and now then turning around and teaching the next generation of that thing.
Yeah, I
So
think so.
so then I want to press into this from a we're leaders that need to train other leaders.
Hmm.
Okay. And let's just think about schooling in general, because I mean, really, the quadrant 4 is about that. We're leaving a legacy by identifying and training new leaders. And this is something you decided to do professionally. This isn't something that happened by accident for you. Some of us need to be convinced that we should, but you chose that this is how you wanted to dedicate at least this season of your life, if not your entire life, of training the next generation of leaders. So one, would love to maybe hear the story on why you decided, but then two, what goes through your head as you're taking time to really sow in, invest in, and curate the education of the next generation.
Sure. I think I can probably hit both of those things, the story and answer that question. I'll make this short because I know we're not trying to make this a super long podcast. Um, back in uh, back in 2013, my wife and I were working 7 jobs between the two of us. And, we were in that grad school and infinite season of part-time jobs. And a buddy of mine, Winston Brady, or Pug, if anybody was there the day he came out, he doesn't come out very often, but Pug hooked me up with a job opportunity at Thales Academy, Rollsville. I interviewed and took the job primarily because I was astounded that anyone would pay me 32,000 a year and give me health insurance. I just thought I
Okay.
had like reached the kingdom. It was amazing. And I quickly fell in love with teaching. And for me, Teaching quickly became first and foremost about the ideas I got to discuss with the students, but then it very quickly became about the students themselves and helping them
Mm.
become the best human beings they can
Hmm.
be. And so over the years, this hasn't happened with all my students because when I was teaching in the high school level, I tended to be working with groups of 10 to 30 students in a given class, depending on the age and the grade level and so on. But invariably, there were between 2 and 6 students who I thought they really got it. And those
Hmm.
students were worth cultivating more relationships with. They were
Hmm.
worth giving additional opportunities to. And
Hmm.
I tried to find ways just to help them kind of see a bigger world. I had one student who he went on to be an engineering major at NC State, but there was a night when the president of my alma mater was doing a fundraising event in Durham. So I emailed Matthew and said, "Hey, Matthew, I'm going out to this event in Durham. You want to come with me? We're just going to go see this. You're never going to go to Hillsdale, but you should come see what a Hillsdale fundraiser looks like."
Hmm.
There was a chance to kind of set up a debate tournament where we would take students and go to Harvard. And I tried to get students that I thought would really benefit from kind of seeing here is the most elite of elite universities in the United States. Let's go check it out and see what it's like to spend 2 days on that campus. It really helped those students kind of see a bigger, broader world. So when I think about kind of a leadership pipeline in a way, I
Hmm.
don't think we can think about that in terms of everybody because I don't think it's
Hmm.
true
That's right.
everyone can truly be a leader in that sense. But all the guys in F3, I think, who make it to kind of being the sword who regularly sign up on the cue sheet,
Mm-hmm.
they tend to be pretty good at keeping an eye out for who are those people who actually would be good at queuing, and they try to nudge so that for those folks get the chance to step into that, and they try to build that pipeline. I think that's what I think of when I'm thinking about the kind of you're kind of always recruiting for more people who can join the leadership core, and you're always on the lookout for those people who are like, okay, you're a little bit more with it. You seem to enjoy this a bit more, and you might do something if I tell you, hey, come out with me to the Deacon. Let's run the Deacon together this year, and it just might result in a little bit more oomph being given to the
Hmm.
activity, and that's my thoughts on kind of
Mm.
leadership development in that sense.
Mm. Great story. Really was. Hits the nail on the head. I think to your point, a lot of us, when we're going to invest in other leaders, we may not be a professor like you are, where we're teaching a subject matter, someone maybe hasn't come to us because we wrote a book. And so, it may start relationally. Hey, come to this event. And we start to see we invest based on who responds to the invite. Um, and so, apprenticeship opportunity and failure might be more appropriate for a lot of our leadership development opportunities. But I still think that there's a point in which when someone really gets serious about learning from you, that there's a little bit more formality that they're looking for. And there's a little bit more formality in the information as you codify a belief system, right? Whether it's through a Bible study or a book study, or it's someone who's working under you that you might decide we need to choose a leadership development book to read together, whether it's Q Source or one of Lencioni's books, that you somewhat formalize a little bit. And not every relationship it needs to be formalized, but there are some relationships that you're building other leaders where it is time. And I've had a number of folks that I've helped and mentored along the way, which when we added in that book, it kind of provided a little bit more structure to where they were trying to get to by
Mhm.
adding that component in. Any thoughts about that?
Well, I guess two thoughts. One, my dad is really, really good at doing that with people. I mean, he's great with just like snagging somebody. He says, "Hey, let's read a book together." So I think there's
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of value in that. I'll just admit I'm a little skeptical of that because the data in the last 5 years is incredibly negative about adults actually reading.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
Something about
right.
it's less than 10% of college educated adults will actually read a book once they are out of college. And we're
Wow,
now
that's
at a
too bad.
point where in college they're no longer actually reading books. So it's a so I my suspicion is that I think that's a true thing that readers are leaders, but it's also something where we've got to wrestle with the fact that very few people will actually read a book. So I so I'll just
Hmm.
plenty of the There's plenty of F3 guys I can think of who will we're fine as long as we're talking about anything and everything but a book.
Yeah.
As it's about a book, the conversation just kind of dies.
Yeah, and I guess I've, kind of two thoughts as we kind of wrap it up, which is one, the practical side of what you said is real. And if you listening to this find yourself and you're more of a listener than you are a reader, you still can pass on a legacy of leadership through apprenticeship, through mentorship, through giving opportunity for folks to lead, through providing a environment of failure. And it may not be as formal as going through a curriculum or reading a book. And so I get that. And I think you shouldn't stop helping people if that's your way. On the flip side of that, I would say sometimes when you are mentoring the next person, it's a great way to find out how serious they are. And if they're not serious, you shouldn't waste your time, and you'd be wasting their time. And sometimes it's a good wake up call for a young man to figure out whether they really want, what you have to offer or not. And that's a great way to say, well, if you'll read this book, let's go. Right.
One really good book I'll just suggest anybody that wants a good leadership book recommendation is I think this is Mark Miller. I might be wrong about the author, but the book is called Chess Not Checkers. And it starts with that exact scenario where there's a young CEO he's kind of hit a wall in leading his company, and his board sort of directs him to an experienced CEO who's now retired but always plays chess in the park. And they just tell him, like, you need to go play chess at this table in the park on Saturday morning. He goes and has this really helpful conversation, and he's really got this sense that the older CEO has got some insight for him. But the older CEO is not willing to really help him until he says, okay, well, here's a book. Read this by next Saturday. And if you've read it, come back. If you haven't read it, don't come back, because you don't really want to grow if you haven't read it. So I think there is something really true. I think you're absolutely right to say, yeah, if you really do want to be a leader, you're going to develop habits of reading that maybe are uncomfortable initially, but they're good. And that's a great litmus test if somebody's really serious about it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Well, Plato, parting thoughts or comments as we wrap up the episode?
Just that leadership is absolutely essential. It is the lifeblood of any institution and organization. We are always only one generation away from institutions collapsing. So anybody who's in leadership has a positive obligation to be cultivating the next generation of leaders.
Love it. Pax, hope you enjoyed this episode. A lot of wisdom. Appreciate you, Plato, and we'll see you this week at the Q Source table.